All right, I think we're live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Clubhouse. We have Clubhouse every Tuesday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. We pick a variety of topics, but if you have a certain topic you want us to cover, please reach out to us. Put it in the comments on any of the platforms. You can send us a private message, anything like that, or you can text it to our community number. What is our community number?
It is 1-870-686-4196. 870-686-4196. And we'd love to hear from you guys.
Absolutely. So today, with June being PTSD Awareness Month, we thought that we would talk about some different things about PTSD, but we did have a couple of questions. And also, while we're talking here, if you have questions, you are welcome to put those in the chat. I have a way to monitor that, so I can bring those questions up. But before we started this, Doc Keith did a live on Instagram about different wording for PTSD, and I thought that was pretty cool, so I'm going to direct that to him. I just kind of threw that on him.
Yeah, PTSD here in the Art Lab today stands for Post-Traumatic Stress Day because we're going to be talking about post-traumatic stress. And the problem I always had with the D part of it, standing for disorder, is I think it's disrespectful to the folks that have post-traumatic stress, because that would be like saying if you had a gunshot wound, you have a disorder. There's something wrong with you. Not that the incident happened or that you're wounded, but PTS, post-traumatic stress, is a psychological wound, which is why we like to call it a psychological injury, post-traumatic stress injury. You grand poobahs out there that come up with this stuff, change that. Yeah, I've got the big book back here. We're going to take my indelible marker and draw a line through the disorder and rename an injury, and we'll wait on your printing presses to catch up. But I just don't think it's very healthy to think of post-traumatic stress as something that means I have a disorder. It actually furthers how people think negatively about it, and furthers the stigma of having traumatic stress. Now, the other thing I want to mention before we really get into the episode, which we only spend about 20 minutes doing these, so I'll give my colleagues some airtime here. We had a recent guest that says that Doc Heath needs a mute button. Oh, yeah, turn that mute button off. The thing with trauma these days, it's almost as if you're not a cool kid on the block unless you've had trauma. And so you have mama didn't give me enough nerds on the rope as a kid trauma, and you have I ran out of coffee trauma, and I didn't sleep well last night trauma, and I have a SpongeBob deficit trauma. And I also think that's disrespectful to people who actually have been exposed to events, situations, circumstances that were a threat to their lives and or limbs or someone else close to them. So as we define trauma in the Art Lab, is really how it's defined in the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which is there really must have been exposure to a threat that could have taken your life or, been a threat to yourself as a person, as if, I don't know, your arm being blown off or something like that. And also telling yourself that everything is a trauma. Consider it this way, as I put it many posts on social media. If every difficult situation is trauma, and all humans have had difficult situations, which they have, then everybody has trauma. And if everybody has trauma, then no one has trauma. And what we've been calling trauma is just ordinary everyday life. One of the most dysfunctional things you can do is call everything trauma just because it's difficult. There are things that are difficult and there are things that are trauma. And just because it's difficult scratching my head here, doesn't make it trauma. Did you guys see the Jeremy Renner interview? If you've not seen that, you guys get out there and watch the, I guess it was, who was the interviewer for that? I almost said Barbara Walters, but I think that she's across the Great Divide at this point. But Jeremy Renner said, I refuse to have this experience be defined as trauma because it seemed like he just viewed that as a limiting thing. So you have the right, if you've experienced trauma, which is a threat to your life or caused you great injury, I think one of the healthiest things you can do is maybe decide that that's not trauma. Jeremy Renner certainly did. And I hadn't thought about it till I saw that episode, but I thought, wow, I think he's onto something. But we're going to talk about trauma today. What do you guys have for us?
Well, we had a couple of questions, and I think Debbie is getting those pulled up.
Yeah, I've got those. So the first question we got from somebody is, what are your favorite go-to resources, books, articles, etc., for those wanting to learn more about PTSD?
Well, don't look at me. I need a mute button.
I know that VA.gov has a lot of good information, and also
they've done a lot of research.
They've done a lot of research. The National Institute of Mental Health has a lot get resources. If you
Don't look at social media.
Social media is not
unless
the best.
Don't get your information off of social media.
Getting your psychological information from social media is a bit like going to the candy store and expecting great nutrition.
Yes.
Right.
If the candy had some type of food poisoning in it, if it was, botulism or something like that, something to make you sick. I thought long and hard about that. I thought that was a great question. I wasn't really sure how to respond to that. I got to thinking, gosh, what book would I recommend? And I finally settled on a book by Viktor Frankl called Man's Search for Meaning.
That was one I had in mind. And there's another one by Dr. Eva Eger. She's also a Holocaust survivor and
a
psychologist, called The Choice. Excellent book.
Another one is, for our veterans, is Achilles in Vietnam. Maybe one you've not heard about, but for you military aficionados or you military service people, Achilles in Vietnam. Because I think that we learn best from those who have really had trauma. One of the things I often wonder about is all the trauma coaches on the internet and on social media, and a lot of those have, I don't know, never really experienced trauma. They've just learned about it. And then others have experienced trauma, but thinking that you can be a trauma coach just because you've gone through trauma, I don't know, in some sense, it's about like thinking I can do heart surgery because I've had heart surgery. I really think that you need to go to a professional who has credentials, and they don't have to have had trauma, but they need to have had a lot of experience in trauma. Unfortunately, or I don't know, maybe fortunately, I've had both. I lost my mother at a young age. I lost my father to a work. He died on the job, and I've had a handful of friends who unfortunately have committed suicide. That's others being exposed to something which threatened or ended their lives. And but then my rotations were through the VA on the PTSD care unit, and I have, that's my credentials. So really buyer beware. When you're looking for somebody to help you with trauma, it's really buyer beware, because there's so many P.T. Barnums out there. What did P.T. Barnum say? There's a sucker born every minute. Don't be that sucker. Go to somebody that has credentials and check them out. And there's no harm asking. I have people ask me, how do you know? I mean, other than the social media trolls. I have social media trolls that say, what are your credentials? I'm not going to get into that with them. But if you're a prospective client or patient, I'm more than happy to share my credentials with you. All you have to do is ask.
That sounds good. Did you guys have anything else? Any other books in mind?
No, those
Or
were
articles?
no, I was thinking about Viktor Frankl's book, but
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing that I run into in social media is people talk about how, they can't overcome trauma, and they label some life incidents trauma. And I think we should be very, very clear. One of the biggest problems in society today is everyone running around diagnosing a mental difficulty or a mental illness or a mental disorder or a mental injury. And that makes about as much sense, going back to my cardiology example, diagnosing yourself with a heart condition. I think you need a cardiologist for that. Even if you're in private practice as a physician, a private practice physician may not diagnose a cardiac anomaly. They will refer that person over to a specialist in the area. But you have people all over social media diagnosing themselves and their neighbor's dog, and the school teachers are diagnosing people, and it just makes diagnosis useless. It just muddies the water so much, and I think that's very sabotaging to people. I was on a recent Instagram debate where somebody told me that they're very well aware of how CBT works, and they're not a clinician. And I challenged that. I said, well, then talk to me about the underlying neurological mechanisms of CBT and what it's based on and the cognitive science behind it. And then conversation over. I didn't hear word one from them, but there are people that really actually mean you harm trying to convince you on social media that you have all these problems. Why? So they can sell you a book or sell you a course or sell you coaching or something like that. And they have absolute goose egg for credentials, zero credentials in the real world. So don't be taken in. But the best place to start treating trauma is where? In your own mind, about what you decide to think about trauma. What are some of the experiences that you've seen people struggle with that actually have trauma? Some of the main symptoms and difficulties that they have?
Big ones is flashbacks and nightmares.
And
hypervigilance.
And that's called, by the way, there's a category, and that is called re-experiencing. There is really not much difference in the brain of an actual real-life experience happening in the moment and a imagined experience, which Heather just called a flashback, and that's what that is. Or a memory of an experience. The brain really processes those in a similar way. So you can be sitting in a very safe location, like a restaurant, and think that you're in great danger if your back is to the door, which is why a lot of people who are law enforcement, military, will not sit with their back to the door, because why? It's that anticipatory belief that something bad is going to happen behind me. By the way, for those of you that struggle with that, experiment with going to a place that is uncomfortable for you and setting, and you don't got to sit there the whole time, but just try this for just 30 seconds. Tap your timer on your phone and just do it for 30 seconds. And the next time you go, we'll try it for maybe 45 seconds or even a whole minute. And so it's called exposure response prevention, ERP. Now, by the way, and gosh, what is this guy's name? He's a big crank on Twitter. Glenn. Hey, Glenn, buddy, if you're listening, I'm talking about you, man. But Glenn is a big somatic experiencing coach or clinician, and we had a debate on that. He said, never do that. And Glenn, I don't mean to misadvertise what you're teaching, but it seems to me that Glenn is really into avoidance. And we talked here that even the grounding technique, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique, although I think that is wonderful, can actually be avoidance. I love mindfulness, but guess what mindfulness can be? Mindfulness can be used as a avoidance technique. If every time you encounter a difficult situation, you do something to stop it, whether it's the grounding technique or the mindfulness technique or what I also teach, which is self-hypnosis, if you're always avoiding, one of the main things that keeps PTSD going is avoidance. So step number 1 is to, Glenn, listen up, buddy, I'm sorry, I don't know your last name, but he's big on Twitter. He's got lots of followers that drink the Kool-Aid. But is avoiding. the more you can avoiding in measured doses of 30 seconds, 45 seconds, 90 seconds, then the more you can take command of what your brain is doing when you encounter a difficult situation. Have y'all had to deal with that, avoiding?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
In fact, the restaurant experiment, I've actually done that in my own life.
Wow.
You know, I have a history of trauma and PTSD, and worked with veterans, with combat vets, in my internship and beyond. And I would talk to them, and we found we had that in common. And so I thought, hey, I'm going to try this out. Because I'd go to restaurants, and it would be really frustrating if that one booth in the back corner wasn't available. You know, I got tired of, this is ruining my whole dining experience, because if they seat me in the middle the whole time.
Well, yeah, because you're thinking what you're doing. You're giving power
Yeah.
to something that is just taking up increasingly more and more room out of your life, and you're welcome to do that. But why would you do that? Why would you surrender your life to something that you don't want to be part of your life? And Glenn, my friend there, and Glenn, hey, holler sometime if you're in the Memphis area. I'll buy you a cup of coffee just to show you there's nothing personal. I'll give you a big hug and a complimentary atomic wedgie. But hopefully it won't traumatize you too much. But a lot of the somatic sensory stuff, or the somatic, what's it called, experiencing stuff, which is probably not bad. It just doesn't have a lot of research behind it. It has on the order of maybe, I don't know, a few hundred studies, and the CBT approach, dealing with this stuff, tens of thousands of studies, and it's been around for half a century. Somatic experiencing, not quite so long. I don't know, maybe it'll pan out. Personally, I think it's a fad. I think it's low-hanging fruit. I think it's clickbait stuff, and it's real clickbaity, telling people what they want to hear. But the thing is, you could be paralyzed from the neck down and still have trauma. And the people that say that trauma lives in your body, well, if you're paralyzed from the neck down, where does it live? Because you can't feel anything if you're paralyzed from the neck down. So trauma is treated by reconfiguring how you're choosing to perceive the world around you, yourself, and others around you, like your family. And with trauma, two of the main things that keep it going also are over assimilation and over accommodation. Assimilation, good. Over assimilation, bad. And some of you clinicians listening, you can go back to your basic bases of cognitive science and look some of this stuff up. But assimilation is a wonderful thing. It lets me know that this coffee cup works pretty much like all the other coffee cups. Over assimilation is drinking from a flower pitcher that looks like a coffee cup because it looks like a coffee cup, but it's a flower pitcher. That's over assimilation. Or thinking that every vehicle works exactly the same. Or if it looks like a duck and walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it must be a duck, not a wind-up children's toy. With re-experiencing, that is a process of over-assimilation. I'll give you an example. I've had soldiers tell me they ran off the road to avoid a cardboard box. Now, why would you do that? We've talked about that before. Because they think it is possibly an IED. I've never heard stateside of an IED in a cardboard box, certainly nowhere around here, but the brain over-assimilates and says this is just like that, and that's what has to be neurologically, cognitively disconnected, and that's where the restaurant experiment can come in handy, is you're literally teaching your brain that a situation like this may not have been safe, but this is a different day, a different time, a different location, a different situation, and I can be safe here. And guess what? Contrary to the presence of anxiety does not mean the absence of safety. Now, if you want a mantra, try that one when you're doing mindfulness, or if you're doing the grounding technique. Add a cognitive technique. Presence of anxiety does not mean absence of safety.
Right. And so the good news is it worked. I tried it out. It took time. I did it gradually, little by little by little, and I can sit anywhere in any restaurant or any room or anywhere now, and it's fine. And so I wanted to do it because I wanted to be able to tell people that I work with it works. I won't ask anybody to do something that I'm not willing to do myself, and so exposure therapy does work.
And you clinicians that treat people who have a post-traumatic stress injury, our figurative hats are off to you. But also, it is not your job to stop that person, that patient, that client's difficulty. It is up to you to come along beside them and take their hand psychologically and take the journey with them through that. Stop trying to stop their normal human experience. Get in the passenger seat because they're the ones driving and take the journey with them. Thank you guys for joining us. I think we may go ahead and do a part 2 next time since it's still post-traumatic stress month. And we talked about re-experiencing this time. We're going to up the ante next time and talk about the next symptom in that little daisy chain and see what to do about that. Try to avoid avoiding and try using the restaurant thought experiment. You can do it in your head, but you can also go to a real restaurant. You may even find some good food to eat. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.